Testing 1, 2, 3. An excerpt by LaFaye. From the anthology Shelf Life, edited by Gary Paulson. I had just started mowing the lawn for Mrs. Whittemore a week after the pretest. She hired me through the mail. That may seem odd, but I got a lot of weird stuff in the mail. When I hit second grade, I started getting a blank card each week. I didn't know who sent them. There was never a return address, not a postmark, just my name, Patrick Troy. Each one was a different blind you bright color, but they never had a word on the card inside. Mrs. Whittemore's card was bright, too. There was no return address. I thought it was another blank card, but instead she asked me to mow her lawn on Saturdays at noon. Hiring someone through the mail is a little weird, but not for Mrs. Whittemore. Everyone said she was a witch. When I was in elementary school, we walked past her place every day. Kids told all sorts of creepy tales about her, hung of witch's claw roots along her front fence. Those little creeps even threw rotten eggs at her house on Halloween. I never did any of that crazy stuff. I just wanted to know what her yard looked like, except for the narrow strip in front. The whole yard was hidden from view by 9-foot hedges. No one I knew ever saw behind those hedges. In fact, no one ever saw Mrs. Whittemore, not even her neighbor, Mrs. Clausen. I mow her lawn, too. She's always telling me stories about her neighbor, like how she sees an odd blue glow of Mrs. Whittemore's cupola at night, and the strange chiming that echoes from the old woman's house on occasion. Mrs. Whittemore stays well hidden behind those hedges, and the chance to get a look at the other side was what made me accept the job, even though she said she'd only pay me with a book. At 5 to noon that Saturday, I pushed my mower up to her front porch and rang the bell. As I came through onto the back porch, I froze. The entire backyard was a carpet of flower rings. Rust-colored mums grew in the center, ringed by blue fuzzy flowers surrounded by pink daisies. The kind of flowers rippled right up to the edge of the porch. I'd never seen such a thing. No wonder she kept her yard hedged in. If she didn't, the place would be crowded with gawkers. The sound of someone clearing her throat turned me around. Mrs. Whittemore sat in a wicker chair, her long legs flung over an arm with a book plopped in her lap. I expected a proper old lady with gray hair and a bun, who wore fancy old-fashioned flowery dresses and brooches. Instead, she wore short pants covered in stars and no shoes. Her gray hair hung over her shoulders. "Hello, I'm Patrick Troy. I've come to do your lawn. Want me to start out front?" She pointed to an old-fashioned push mower with whirly blades sitting next to a porcupine statue at the edge of her backyard. Old people like old things. No problem. That gave me more time to think over my study guide for the big test. "You want me to use that out front?" She shook her head and pointed to the flower circles. Why didn't she talk? Was she mute? Did she really want me to cut down all those great-looking flowers? "You want me to mow your flowers?" Nodding, she held up a card. It looked blank. I walked closer, figuring she couldn't speak, so I had to read her instructions. As I got farther, the card seemed to have gray, squiggly lines that moved around like curly hair caught in the wind. Standing right in front of her, squinting, the lines darkened and stiffened into letters. I thought I needed to get my eyes checked for new glasses. That happened every spring. The card read, "The butterflies need exercise." She smiled, her misty eyes getting all shiny. The old lady had to be nuts, but I didn't want to upset her, so I started mowing her flowers. I felt guilty for cutting them down. Then I noticed the butterflies taking flight. In colors as brilliant and varied as the flowers, they took off in all directions, like the flower petals had turned into wings. I had to stop and watch them fly. As they flew higher, they looked like bits of confetti headed for the clouds. Mrs. Whittemore cleared her throat again. When I looked her way, she waved her hand to tell me to get busy. "Starry," I said, mowing ahead. The entire sky filled with bright wings as I moved in a circle. I don't know why I did it that way, but it almost felt like I traveled down a spiral slide that kept pushing me forward. By the time I had the back lawn done, I felt dizzy. I had to lie down for a minute, but it gave me a chance to see the last of the butterflies fly off. The backyard looked like the school gym after a dance. Instead of shredded streamers, the place was covered in shed petals. As I stepped onto the porch, Mrs. Whittemore stood up to hand me the book she'd been reading. I felt like a dwarf. She towered over me. I'm already 5'10". I'd never seen such a giant woman before. No wonder why she needed such a tall hedge to keep her privacy. I took the book. She held up another card. Even that close up, it looked like the letters swirled. I figured I was still a little dizzy. The card read, "To help you study." "Thanks," I said, but I was wondering how a hermity old lady knew about the tests. "Same time next Saturday?" She nodded. I came out her front door feeling like I'd just walked out of an intense movie and I hadn't quite readjusted to the real world again. I checked my watch to be sure I'd get to Mrs. Clausen's on time. My watch said noon. How could it only be 12 o'clock? There was no way I could have mowed that yard in 5 minutes. I figured my watch battery had run down again. That happened to me a lot. My mom said it was my magnetic personality. Ha ha.